Hey. Hello, hello, and welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Uplate. I'm joined, as always, by my beautiful co-host, Brian Sanders.
Beautiful. All right. I'll take it.
I need to think of a new adjective every week.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what we'll do. All right, welcome back, guys. It's good to see you guys. If you're new here, this is a true crime show, so you know what you're in for. This is a very different one, a different type of show than we usually do tonight.
Yes.
Although
yes,
it involves a trial, so
Mm-hmm.
it is still a crime. Nonetheless, we're just going to let you guys decide what you think of it. If you are new to this show, we air live on YouTube on the Andrea Uplate YouTube channel every Tuesday night in about a 6.5 hour window. And Brian is a retired homicide lieutenant, so that generally helps with a lot of the things that we're covering when it comes to investigations and timelines and these kinds of things, as you can imagine. Tonight, we are covering a case out of Germany.
Yeah.
We don't usually do that.
I don't speak German. I would have said, yes, we are, but.
Or night, we're not.
Yes. Huh?
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that no?
Yeah. I don't. Sorry, I don't speak German.
I think it is. We are also, like I said, a live YouTube show. So if you're just listening wherever you stream your podcast, just know that you can always hop in the chats on a Tuesday night. And so occasionally you will hear us either shout out some names or engage with the folks in the chats who have become our buddies. So, okay, we got somebody saying something about buffering going on. Oh, boy. Well, we're just gonna keep going on and see how it goes.
Yeah.
If it's terrible, you can just listen wherever you stream. Did you did not do any pop culture this?
I did not, other than the year of 1976.
That's the year that we're calling this case taking place.
That Viking 1 spacecraft from the U.S. lands on Mars. Did you know that?
No.
No, I didn't either. I've read just a little bit, just enough to be like, I don't remember this happening, and I don't know that I believe it. So anyway,
on Mars?
Yeah. I did start reading stuff.
Wait, like a craft? I mean, not people.
No, but even a spacecraft.
I
don't know. I don't know how they reached all the way out there, landed it, and then transmitted stuff back. I don't know. I question all that. Anyway, that's as far as I got for
that's for a different show. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, okay. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a lot of pop culture.
No, well, I didn't ask.
We don't need it.
We don't need it. Tonight's probably going to be a bit of a quicker episode. It's pretty cut and dry, and you're going to decide at the end if you think this would be considered murder. So that's exactly what happened in the trial. So we're just going to see. That's interesting. It says 0. So let's get started. This is the case of Annaliese Michel. So it's spelled Michel, but again, she was German. So the pronunciation could be such that I'm butchering it, but we're just going to go for it and see how we do. Now, if you guys ever saw, I believe it was 2005, we can take it back further to the movie The Exorcist.
Mm-hmm.
But more notably, in 2005 was the movie called The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys saw it in the chats, let me know. But I did actually see it. And that's stuff that I don't really watch very much these days. Of course, I guess that's almost 20 years ago now these days. But, But anyway, so... Sorry, if this sounds bad, we're going to try to clean it up on the back end. People are saying that it's buffering and acting kind of funny. So we'll see what we can do. But either way, so The Exorcism of Emily Rose was actually based off of a real woman, a young woman named Annaliese Michel out of Germany who passed away in the year 1976 after a tormented few years in a very gruesome few months. So we're going to chat about that, okay? So she was born Anna Elizabeth Michel, and she was born on September 21st of 1952 in West Germany to a Roman Catholic family. So so her parents were Joseph and Anna, and they had 3 other daughters as well. So there were the 4 daughters. Joseph and Anna were devout Catholics, and they were very attached to their church. They went to mass twice a week. But some strange things started happening around the time Annaliese turned 16 years old. So what had been, she was noted to be kind of not shy, but a little bit more of a wallflower, but very friendly, very bright, but a little bit sickly. She had, growing up, she had had measles, mumps. She eventually had a tonsillectomy. She had, I mean, you just kind of name it.
Yeah.
Tuberculosis, which is a biggie. So she had kind of contracted a lot of things over the years in her early childhood. So I'm actually going to click over as we're chatting, and you're going to have to let me know if they're saying stuff in the chats that I'm going to need to be aware of.
Okay.
So soon after she turned 16 years old, everything really turned on its head in a very, very bad way. So one day she was at school and she lost consciousness and she kind of fainted, fell on the floor. She woke up and she will say later that she was in a daze. She really didn't have much of a memory of anything that went on that day. By that nighttime, though, she laughed it off with her friends, right? So she was notably kind of embarrassed because she had no idea what was going on. But by that nighttime, she said that her body became numb. So she lost control over some of her bodily functions. So she lost control of her bladder, even like the muscles in her tongue. She couldn't speak very well.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a short-lived paralysis, but nonetheless, it was terrifying, as you can imagine, right? So she started having some issues when she would go to bed, almost kind of like a sleep paralysis, what people will describe as that, where she would wake up, feel a heavy weight on her chest, and not be able to move, not be able to scream, not be able to raise her arms or anything like that. So this was kind of going on and off as time went on. So a few months kind of go by, and now it's August of 1969. It's been almost a year since that initial incident at school when she had passed out. So she does this again. She blacks out, and then it's followed by this unusual paralysis. So this time she goes to the doctor. Her parents take her in. Again, she's a teenager. She's around 17 at this point. So they go to a neurologist. They perform multiple tests. And even though her brain activity on the diagnostic test called an EEG, that's what you test for seizures with, okay? That came back normal, but they said that her symptoms, everything really mimicked what it would look like to have what would be called a temporal lobe epilepsy, okay? So that's just a part of your brain. So they're just kind of specifying where they think this epileptic event was occurring from inside her brain. So they say that the blackouts and the paralysis were caused by seizures, and she was given some medication at that time to treat this epilepsy, okay? And none of this is abnormal.
Mm-hmm.
So more times than not, I think people are sometimes surprised to hear that many more times than not, when someone is diagnosed with a seizure disorder or sometimes just has one seizure and never again, often doctors won't know where it came from or why you had it, or why you even continually have them. And you get put on medication and driving restrictions and these kinds of things. But usually the cause of it is unknown. So none of this is really abnormal. And even that EEG that I mentioned a moment ago coming back normal, that's normal. Because unless you're actually either having a seizure at the time of the EEG, that's why they hook it up and leave it on you for hours and hours or a day or so at a time. If you don't have one while you're wearing it, it's not going to pick up that activity unless you've had them so many times that it's actually caused some damage to your brain, which ultimately it can do over time. But so far, all of this kind of tracks. So she gets back home and she continues to take her medication. That was undisputed by anyone who knew her. She religiously took her medication. But it didn't really seem to help with the symptoms. She now starts to actually increase with symptoms and starts hearing voices. And starts having some visions. So she starts relaying complaints that she has that she's seeing like demonic faces on the walls of her home. Are we getting any feedback that things are better?
Everything seems to be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she actually starts getting very depressed. This, again, keep in mind, even if she wasn't a devout Catholic, I don't think anybody wants to see what they consider to be demonic faces on the wall. Yeah. But she had grown up in the church, and I think that the weight of this really terrified her. So she started to really get depressed and just was not happy at home. Things weren't good with her from a mental standpoint in that sense. So she went on to be in a like an institution, like a psychiatric institution for a little while, mainly to treat this depression. And then because, again, she had been complaining about seeing these demonic faces on the walls, and her parents just didn't know what to do with all of this stuff. She keeps on, again, with her medication while she's there in the psych hospital, but nothing stopped. Her seizures continued, and these visions that she was having continued. So basically, years go by. So the crux of what we're going to talk about is going to occur for the last like 10 months of her life, but that's when she's 23 years old. Right now, she's like 16, 17, 18. She said that over the, like, she went to years, she went to all these different doctors, as you can imagine. She went to an ENT one time. She had her ears checked because she said that she was hearing all these noises in her floorboards, noises in her ceilings. And then eventually you'll hear that people she lived with would say that occasionally they would hear these things when she was around. Okay. So in 1973, she had enrolled at university. She met a boy named Peter. They start dating. And things have gotten a lot worse at this point. She's now saying that the devil is actually inside her. This is her idea of the events that are going on. And so she continues on with the hallucinations. And then she's starting to report smelling very foul odors. And very specifically, it was burning feces is what she says that she's smelling.
Okay.
Over and over and over. So she and Peter start to date. And, you know, that didn't go too far. I don't think they dated for a while. They remained friends, but she obviously was very preoccupied. A lot of things were going on here. So she continues to go to multiple doctor's appointments. And finally, her mental health, her physical health even starts to decline pretty quickly. She would say that she was hearing knocking sounds consistently on her bedroom walls. What she thought she saw were demons. She thought a devil was inside her. Now she's saying that she's hearing them and that they would whisper in her ear, that they were inside her. It's starting to sound like she's really having maybe a schizophrenic break or something like this. It's sounding bad, which, and I think you would agree, this is about the age that things like this can start happening, right?
Yeah. Early 20s, usually. And
she's approaching 20 at this time. But here's the deal, though. We don't just have like what Annaliese says is happening inside her body, because as these episodes continue, you now start to see, you have accounts of other people who say they witnessed certain things within her that would not be explained by a psychosis or by a schizophrenia. So there was a time when her mother says that she herself witnessed Annaliese was standing in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary. Okay. She had been praying. She was standing in front of it. And then she got quiet. And her mother says that when she approached her, Annaliese looked at her. And as she had been staring at the statue of the Virgin Mary, her eyes were as black as night. This is per her mother. And even stranger, that her different sources call it two different things, but that her hands grew, they say grotesquely, like in front of her mom. So as she's looking at her child or this teenage girl standing in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary, her eyes are black and her hands change in like form and they grow. They become like gnarled, and I've read like paws or like claws. Oh, is what her mom says. Okay. That this was like a brief transformation. It happened as soon as it was gone. And obviously it left her mom more than shaken. So they call in Father Alt. He's the first priest that comes to see Annaliese that actually believes that something demonic is going on. And so she wants him to help her, because in the moments that she's not feeling this way, she continuously asks she doesn't want to see any more medical doctors. She wants to see a priest. She wants someone to get this out of her. She keeps saying she's damned. And she wants someone to help get this out of her and fix her. So he goes on to say that he never saw her once having a seizure. And here's the deal. We can dispute back and forth, this whole time, whether or not she ever had a seizure disorder. Even if she did, that does not necessarily discount what we're talking about now. But then there are some who will say that because of the seizure disorder that caused what is happening now. So we'll discuss all of that. So Father Alt petitioned the local bishop to have her case examined so that they could potentially get an exorcism. So the way this worked at the time, and I would assume still, is that you cannot, like, the priest can't just walk in and perform an exorcism. Like, they actually have a lot of criteria and rules on what is going to be accepted as a case of demonic possession or not. And if that's the case, a lot of times they actually will bring in psychiatrists and or medical doctors to rule out other illnesses or psychiatric illnesses first before, I mean, the more prudent ones will, right? Before they just go straight to exorcism. So she first goes to this bishop who was Father Renz, Arnold Renz. So he was qualified to perform the exorcisms. So they bring him, he carries out all these tests to see if he can verify the claims that they've been making. So at first they say no. At first they say, well, you know, they kind of spit her back out to say, like, go see a medical doctor. I'm not sure. So it's not like, I will say, they were just quick to immediately take her up and just go jump right through this. But as her symptoms increased in severity and she started checking off more of their, like, bullet points, if you will, of criteria to meet what they needed for an exorcism, then they kind of start to change their mind. At one point, Father Rentz will say that he was shocked when he saw her, that she appeared to be thrown from a standing position to the floor by what he considered to be an unseen force. He said that, like, it was so unnatural in movement that it's not something she could have done to herself. So she continued to get pushed down, and she'd get back up on her knees to pray and be pushed back down to the floor again. And this is just constantly, this is one of the earlier times he saw her. And he said this happened over and over again. So she's hitting the floor, sometimes face first, getting right back on her knees. She's praying, hitting the floor. By the time this session now she's not being exercised here. This is just a visit he's having with her, kind of an intake. Okay. And by the time they're done there, he said that she was covered in just gashes and bruises and from all of this trauma. He said that she had been thrown around the room constantly. So he sat next to her and he started to say, they start to get into, eventually they bring back some people with them and start to talk a little bit to the demons inside her, just to kind of see what they're working with. Okay. And we'll discuss at the end whether or not, you as the listener believe that this is anything that's even possible, or that even exists in the world. If you don't, just then take this as a creepy horror story for you right before bed tonight. And if you do, also take it as a creepy horror story right before bed tonight. So he sits down, Father Renz sits down next to her, and he starts saying to the demons inside her for them to identify who they are. So she grabbed at her neck and she rips off the rosary that she's been wearing, and throws it. So she starts speaking in tongues. She's tearing out her clothing. She's trying to attack those in the room. Now, they will all agree that she had such force about her that would not have been natural to her being. So if you were to go back and look at criteria to suggest demonic possession, she's checking them off right now. So, like, the unnatural strength, speaking in an unknown language, a distaste, a bother, repulsion for all things holy, right? So she's kind of, all of these things are happening. So the Vatican goes on and approves the exorcism, and they start it, and this continues for the next year and a half. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the most part tonight. So I will say one of the rules for those that are performing the exorcism is that, like, there can be no media present. So there's a reason you don't usually have, videotape and, like, high quality production and things like this. That's against all of their rules for an exorcism. What you will have sometimes, though, are audio recordings. And they did, in fact, record many of Annaliese's exorcisms in the vein of research, because as they go on, they realize they haven't heard anything quite like this before, and they had performed these before. So Annaliese, some sources say that she herself asked that the tapes would eventually be made public because she wanted people to have proof that the devil was real. So you've got to understand that when she was going through these episodes of having like what seemed to be active, like demonic possession, versus not, she would act out or be violent or whatever the case was that day. And then she would kind of come out of it and then be in almost what they considered to be a catatonic state. Just essentially pass out, would not talk, would not look at anyone. And then sometimes she would start to come to and be herself and speak normally and pray, and beg for help, beg for the priest, beg. And then it would go right back into the demons speaking for her. Okay. So as time goes on, you've got to understand that they start performing these exorcisms and things only get worse. So the demons only become stronger per their account. She said that there were 6 demons inside her. And at this point, I've read it so many times that I think I don't even have to look, but I want to make sure I'm telling you exactly. So the first one, I believe, identified himself as Judas. So that'd be Judas, like of Bible time Judas, Cain, Lucifer, Hitler, and Nero. So if you're not familiar, Judas would be the man in the Bible that betrayed Jesus Christ. Lucifer speaks for itself. It's actually Satan, like actually a demon. Cain would be the man in the Bible who would have been one of 2 sons of Adam and Eve. So you've heard of Cain and Abel. So Cain was the first murderer on the planet. He killed his brother Abel. I think Hitler speaks for himself. And Nero was actually a Roman emperor back around, I think, like in the 40s, 50s. I think he might have died in the 54 AD. Anyway, very long time ago, Roman emperor, but he was known to be just vile. So he had multiple family members of his killed. I believe he took like a drink break while his mom was being mutilated in front of him. Like bad guy. And he would also burn Christians alive. So if that gives you a little bit of a idea, there was also a Fleischmann who was a German priest from years prior who had been disgraced and had been charged with murder and some other things like that. So he's one that kind of doesn't seem to fall into quite the same realm as some of these other, but these would be the 6 demons that she or they will say are inside of her. And as these exorcisms go on, they kind of continue to battle each other. So they say bad things about each other and are trying to push the others out because each one of them wants sole control of her being to get their own point across. So as these exorcisms go on, really strange things are happening around the house. Her mom will later say that she saw stigmata on Annaliese's hands, which is in and of itself a controversial topic. People believe it fully exists and people fully believe it does not exist. That would be where she would, let's say, appear to have the holes of Christ in her hands, symbolic of the crucifixion, and often blood from that. So her mom will say that she saw that in Annaliese. That's up for, no one else said that they saw that as far as I know. So that can be up for question, up for debate there. But other people do account for some of the things. Like they will have sometimes smelled some of the things she smelled or hear some of the things that Annaliese said that she heard. And let it be known that by the end of this, when this is all said and done, and actually it ends with Annaliese's death, no one that had been around her, family, friends, priests, there was not a single soul that had been around her during any of this time that denied that she was being possessed by demons. So it wasn't like somebody came back and said, no, we have a history of schizophrenia in the family, and I begged them to take her to a doctor. Everyone unequivocally believed her to be possessed by demons. So there became a time when and other people will account for this, strange things like swarms of flies in ways you would not otherwise see would go in and then out of the room that she was in. An unnerving amount of dead bugs started piling up in the hallways leading toward her bedroom. Just really bizarre things. And I'm pointing these out because, again, these are things that aren't just like what they say Annaliese said, or what just maybe mom said that she witnessed in her. And so it gets so bad that there was a time when she just was under a table for 2 full days, growling. She started refusing food. Again, she would speak in tongues. She started to actually drink her own urine off of the floor, and would, as she refused real food, would start shoveling in handfuls of the dead bugs and spiders to eat. Now, I will say, we know that with certain psychoses, the drinking of the urine, the eating of the bugs, growling, any of those things can definitely happen. So not to discount any of that, especially in severe cases and severe cases that are untreated. We know that she had been on like Tegretol. She'd been on a couple of different medications, one for seizure treatment and another one that also would be used for if someone did have schizophrenia. It's actually for like convulsions, but it also would be used for if you have schizophrenia and combativeness and this and that. None of these things changed her behavior. In fact, like I said, her behavior only worsened over time. So they continue to bring her large amounts of food and water. She continues to push it away. So she's starting to lose weight as all of this is going on. But if anything, she's gaining strength. So I think that that's kind of the bizarre thing. She's not eating. She's getting very frail, but she is gaining strength. At one point, I believe it was her sister who said that she looked at her. She made eye contact and she squeezed an apple with one hand and it exploded into bits. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that. There's a little party trick where sometimes I think grown men may try to see if they can squeeze an apple and make it crack, but it doesn't really. Try it. Go in your kitchen and try it. It's not that easy. And 20, 21, 22-year-old Annaliese, who at this point was barely 100 pounds and was not eating food, would have had a very difficult time to explode an apple like that with a single hand. She was getting very sick. Her face was getting sunken. At this point, she's starting to have broken teeth because she has been hitting her face against a wall. One time she pushed her head through a window. And again, these things can happen with psychoses. So, just we're looking at the whole picture, but not discounting that whatsoever. Her knees are starting to get more and more swollen because she continues to fall onto her knees to pray in a lot of these moments. And then she's thrown out of that position. So just kind of like the original meeting with her that the priest had, that activity is still going on to the point that ultimately, by the time of her death, she had actually torn the ligaments in both of her knees and both of her patellas, both of her kneecaps were broken. So this is what we're looking at here. So all in all, by the end of all of this, they will have performed 67 exorcisms. They have 42 of them recorded on tape. Okay. She didn't get any better. So some will argue that, after the first, say 3, 4, 5, maybe you'd think, well, maybe this isn't the ticket, like maybe we should do something else. I think that that's one of the arguments on the other side of things. And those that believe that she was possessed just say that it's because the demons were so strong that all they could do was continue to try and that no medical treatment would have fixed any of this or changed this for her. So you kind of be the judge of that. She does die when she's 23 years old. She was 66 pounds at the time of her death. Oh. So when she dies, the family goes into her. It was July 1st of 1976, and it was around 8:30 in the morning. They find her passed away in the bed. I want to find her last words. The last words that she had said the night before, right after the last exorcism that she had, dealt with finally having been atoned. But it was like Annaliese was saying that. So those that had been around her, and again, though, this is something else to consider. These things were recorded. So these things were on tape. This isn't, it's not that it's become hearsay over time. And so a lot of those around her will say that they think that she finally, essentially what was the end of her was the last demon leaving. If they believe that to have been the case. So the medical examiner comes to the home to see her. And the dad is saying that she died of a natural death. But the medical examiner is saying there's no way I can call this a natural death. Like, she looks like she's just
Yeah.
been beaten.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go on now and show you a little bit about what, and I will say some of this kind of, I mean, it's not the same as like when we look at some of these crime scene photos, but it's not pleasant to look at. So let me show you what Annaliese looks like when this all started. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty young girl. You can see she's got, she's in shape. She's got meat on her bones. She's smiling. Here's Annaliese with her mother during one of the exorcisms. So if you are not watching, it looks like she's in a state of, I don't know, fighting exorcism.
Yeah, she's
Grimacing.
almost like, teeth are like kind of gritting, but her eyes are so dark that it actually looks like makeup to me. I'm looking at that, like, if you didn't know what it was, you would think it was almost like filming something like a movie.
Yeah, or like when a 3-year-old gets purple eyeshadow.
Yes.
It's down well below her lower eyelids, all the way up to her eyebrows, like full on actual circles, and filled in circles of dark around her eyes. You can tell, I think there even, that she's gotten skinnier. So that's pretty tough. I'm going to show you another one. These are two different pictures of, part of the exorcisms. So here you can see in her neck, her jawline, she's gotten visibly more emaciated. She still has the black eyes. You guys, from what I understand, she essentially perpetually had these. Some of it's going to be from lack of sleep. She also only slept for about an hour to 2, just about every day. And was not eating, and again was being thrown all over the floor and into walls. She started biting walls and smacking her head into them so hard that she started breaking her teeth off, like I said earlier. We've got a picture this is from a newspaper article right after she dies. Now I'm going to show you a pretty yucky picture now, okay? So it's going to be a picture of Annaliese right at the time of her death. So it's going to be her on the left when she was healthy before all of this started, and then her on the right by the time of her death. And that is what she became. It's tough. I may put that on Instagram. I may put a blur over it just so you can have the choice to look at it or not. But I'll put these on Instagram on the Andrea Uplate page. You'll be able to view the photos from this. And it might just give you a little more indication of what we're talking about here, because it's rough. Like, there is no exaggeration in what that looked like. Now, I think that what we really need to do is hear a little bit of what she sounded like. That might help you make a more informed decision here. So if you have any issues or whatever triggers with this kind of thing, or any weird past experiences, I hope it's nothing like this, then listen with caution. But again, she's speaking Latin most of the time in these, and she had a very basic working knowledge of Latin. She was not fluent in Latin per her family and friends whatsoever, but in these tapes, when the demons are speaking for her, she's speaking in Latin most of the time. But the beginning of this one, if I recall, I've got a couple of these saved. The beginning of this one is her speaking normally first. So you'll be able to hear just kind of an interview with her speaking in German as very normal Annaliese. Let's see here. Okay. Well, there it is. Okay, so listen up. My goodness, you guys I is so sorry here. Okay, that's not her normal.
nicht. Noch mehr. Ja, die Kirche geht mit wieder rein. Kirche.
Okay, and I'm going to play a little bit more. Davey in the chats just said that's got some evil behind it. I'll tell you my thoughts on this at the end here in a moment. This is going to be a much shorter show, like I said before, but I fully agree. She was not known to be an expert in drama, and I think that even with psychoses, this is a whole some may find it silly. It feels in my core like an entirely different kind of thing we're dealing with here. But here, let you hear this.
Aber dass das dann so schlimm ist und so
that's
grausam
her
und so furchtbar. Nee. Ihr Glätze. Nein, ihr Glätze.
Kind Gottes.
It's not all screaming.
Annaliese would again.
So what they're doing here is going back and forth, and there's one. I'll try to put it up on Instagram, but it actually goes through, and it lists them. Like, so the closed captioning, it'll say Lucifer, Cain, Judas, whatever, and it'll be her speaking when it's supposed to be that particular demon fighting for the floor, if you will. Davey's talking in the chat saying Latin or speaking in tongues. Yes, she did both quite often. She would go back and forth. And it would be all the same topic. Like usually if they would bring up one of the other demons within her, it would say, essentially to the idea of like, oh, that Nero, like he can't, whatever. And he's this, and sometimes even almost some juvenile type wording of things, but I feel like I've read that kind of account before. So that happens. The medical examiner, like I told you, comes and says, okay, I can't, you guys just saw the picture of her, right? So he's like, I can't rule this a natural death in good conscience. Like she needs an autopsy. So they do this. The autopsy actually shows that no matter what her outward appearance was, and we know how like ill she must have been in the sense of the lack of food, the dehydration, the lack of sleep, all of these things, her internal organs were without fault. They were all unremarkable. Nothing was out of the norm for them. And then her brain. So the testing of her brain showed absolutely zero abnormalities down to a microscopic level. So remember at the beginning, I told you that if you've just had a few seizures and you have an EEG done and it measures your brain waves, it may look normal because you're not having one actively during the test, or you've not had enough that it's actually damaged your brain yet. Mm-hmm. At this point, after all these years, if she was having these seizures, I'm not a medical examiner, but I think for the most part, you're going to expect to find some kind of damage to the brain at this point, even if it's minuscule. This had been intense. So the autopsy happens. They ultimately find her cause of death to be starvation, malnutrition, starvation, dehydration. And so it doesn't take very long, and they go on the state and charge Annaliese's mom, dad, and the two priests with negligent homicide. Okay? They say that they could have prevented this from happening. They should have gotten her medical treatment long ago. They could have kept her from starving to death. And so it's interesting. So the church actually paid for the legal fees for the priests, and mom and dad were defended by the defense attorney Eric Schmidt-Legner, which, if you are a history buff, you might know that this was an actual defense attorney in the Nuremberg trials. So he represented some different folks during the Nuremberg trials, which was interesting. So the state recommended that, well, ultimately they were to receive 6 months in prison, all 4 of them, because they kind of go back and forth about whether or not it was negligent homicide, whether or not she was actually possessed by any kind of demons, right? So ultimately the state decides to go on and give them 6 month sentences, but essentially time served in the sense of, I think within the court docket, it says, quotes, they've suffered enough. So they wound up getting like 3 years probation. As you can imagine, exorcisms in Germany almost came to a screeching halt after this. The church turned their heads. They didn't want any part of this, didn't want any part of what happened to this little girl or young woman. And that was pretty much it. So the trial had started on March 3rd of 78. And then by April of that same year, it was all said and done. So interesting, though, they would not allow the tapes to be heard at the trial. And it was not a jury trial. It was just a judge, but they did not want the tapes there. So
hold on. Why is that? I mean, I don't, not sharpshooting you, but like, was it, I would imagine the
defense would
want them and the prosecution would not want them. So I'm curious how, we don't know.
Well, I'm trying to see exactly. That's what I'm looking at right now.
And while you're looking up, the main reason I say that is that would be a recording of the incident that you're being charged with. So the only way I could see that a prosecution would say, in America at least, that or would object would be maybe the authentication of the recording.
Well, I think also, let me see here. Go on, keep talking for a second.
But because oftentimes, like surveillance footage from a police investigation from their own devices can be authenticated. Or
I'm sorry, they did use them, but at first they were not going to let them. They had to push and push and push to be able to. And my only thing too would be that I think even still, prosecution doesn't need the tapes. Like, the defense wants them as a defense, as what happened, but the prosecution obviously doesn't want them, but they don't even need them, I don't think, for a burden of proof, because at the end of the day, she was dead from starvation at what they consider to be parents' neglect. And if tapes or no tapes, you know what I'm saying?
It potentially could hurt the prosecution's case, because when you hear those tapes, to then understand something's like the average citizen may hear it and then go, okay, I can hear you say all day long, she's speaking in tongue, or she's speaking
or growling.
But then when you hear it and then know it compared to
that voice we heard of hers.
And I know that's crazy. Some people would go, oh, whatever, an 80-pound person can growl just like a 200-pound man or something. Maybe not. I don't. I've heard people growl before, and usually.
Well, you and I have gone back and forth on this. I mean, I think we're in agreement with each other, but we've talked about this particular case, and like, ultimately, the defense also claimed that it's not unlawful. It was not illegal to perform an exorcism. They did it within the rights of the church. It was not an unlawful thing. And so, that's kind of where they came to with their defense as well. But we've both been around people with psychotic disorders, or during a break. You on the kind of the day-to-day, if you come upon a call and that's might be what's going on, or maybe that was the defendant, in cases that you've tried. And then or for me when I spent some time in a psych hospital. And I will tell you that it can be unnerving. So I'm not saying like a true psychosis, a true psychotic event can make you feel very uncomfortable. It can feel almost evil in nature. It can make you question your own sanity sometimes, to be honest. And I'm going to kind of liken this to like a reference I use often for things is kind of like if people are maybe don't look at the ocean a whole lot, but they see something out there and they see a fin and they think maybe that's a shark, you know, and it turns out to be a dolphin. But when you see a shark, you know it's a shark. Like there's no getting around it.
Yeah.
And so with something like this, like if you're in the near vicinity of someone who's having a psychotic break and maybe using a different type of voice than they usually use, a different look comes upon their face, they're acting very differently than they normally would, and it may feel a bit evil, or may feel, when you listen to this and look at her, it's almost like there's no doubt about it, it's evil. And that's my take. Again, if you don't believe that this kind of thing can happen, that's fine. That's your prerogative to believe. But I don't know. I feel to my core, I think any of the things could be true. She could have been having a psychotic break. She could have had the seizures, and she also could be having demonic possession.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or two of the three, I mean.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, in criminal cases, to prove criminal intent or to prove, because you're charging somebody basically in Germany, whatever the equivalent of, they contributed to her death. I don't know exactly what they would have done that did, other than they're saying because they didn't seek medical attention.
Well, that's why they consider it. Yeah. And it was under the charge of negligent homicide. And I think that the prosecution just argued that at any time in the 10 months that these exorcisms were occurring, you could have taken her to a facility where they would have tranquilized her, put a tube in her tummy, made her eat, given her nutrients, be it against her will or not. And the defense argued that, hey, not only do we believe as a church sanctioned bishop and father, that we were well within our religious rights and legal rights to perform these exorcisms. Not only that, but that by this point, Annaliese was well of age. She was no longer a minor, and she was begging not to go back to any more medical doctors. She begged them to save her, to help her.
Yeah.
And so that's what they argued, was like, well, she's an adult and that's not what she wanted.
And that's a tough one too. I mean,
well, it's tough because I think then they have to prove that she was incompetent to make these decisions for herself, the prosecution. And I just don't know how you can do that.
I would not want to be the charging.
It's a tough one.
You know what I mean? Like that doesn't, well, we were talking about it earlier, and so I looked to see how many times someone's been charged in a murder case with exorcism related. And I was like, whoa, it's actually a lot more than I thought. 2015 in Berlin, Germany charged 5 South Koreans for murder during an exorcism of a relative. So one of the
that is a loaded headline. Like I would want to know so much more about that case. But. Yes,
the good news is I'm just going to move right on from that and let everybody think about it. There's a common theme that goes in these. 2019, Tucson, Arizona. Man admits the death of a 6-year-old son during an exorcism. 2017.
It was his son.
Eureka, California. Yep. Mother arrested on murder of daughter, 11-year-old, during an exorcism.
Okay.
2020, Florida, deputy arrested for murder after exorcism of his child. But when you read a little bit more of that, it sounds like maybe with this one, he himself was having some kind of break.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a lot of these, but go ahead.
Exactly. 2012, Spain arrested a priest and their local, they call it an exorcist.
Okay.
And the priest, as if there were 2 different people.
Yes, it probably was.
Yeah. And so they were charged. And the priest had said that he had been in on 200 other exorcisms. And in 2013, the Catholic Church in Spain, in that area, were saying that they had a huge increase.
I read about that. I read about that in prepping for this case. Yeah.
Yes. So that was a little eye-opening. And then in 2022, there was a case of a 3-year-old who died in San Jose, California. And the grandfather was a pastor with a Pentecostal church.
So that's what my problem with those is. I don't put those in the same boat as the case of Annaliese.
Right. And that's what I was going to say.
These are people at home saying, "Oh, you're."
The headlines read as if it's an exorcism,
a legitimate exorcism.
Yeah,
yes,
it pulls you in, and then as you start to read it, we've
talked about that all day long. And with when you were still working, when you were still at the department as a homicide lieutenant, like you can make numbers do a lot of things. So now we have all these numbers for trials where people, someone died under the, in a what's it, execution. That's what that was probably, but in a exorcism, and really these are not the same exorcisms. These are not, the people.
Right.
Yeah. So
yes. So that's what I was going to say. It was like the underlying theme of often a parent, the child dies at the hands of the parent, and it's as if they're doing things to them. In one of the cases, the mother was pushing her fingers down the daughter's throat to get the spirits to come out. And like you said, that sounds like a lot of those probably just on the surface could have involved mental health issues with the actual adults involved. Yeah. And you have different things too, but none of these I would consider to be under like an exorcism as we know it to be with demons. I took care of a child once that he would come in and have he would have scheduled electroshock therapy. Now keep in mind, guys, we still do actually do that. It's ECT therapy. It's minimal. It's very incredibly different than anything that you would think of when you think in decades past with mental health treatment. You're sedated. It's a whole different thing. And actually has had really positive results. But again, please think apples and oranges to decades prior. But that child was deaf because he had come from a country where he, I think, ran a fever one time and the witch doctors thought he was possessed. And so they did all kinds of things to this child's ears and he wound up being deaf as a result. So these kinds of things can happen in places that, again, I don't equate that to what happened here. So when the movie was made, the Exorcism of Emily Rose, all the way up then later in 2005, it follows decently well along with the real story, with obviously there are some exclusions to that. And they definitely kind of twist it. They paint it in a light of that the priest was fraudulent from the get-go. Like this would have been more than a negligent homicide and those kinds of things. So, there's some differences there. But just do know that that's what the movie is based off of, albeit a little loosely at times. But I just think it's interesting when you have people other than just the priest, though. You've got mom saying stuff, but let's say mom was very devout. Now, mom, she could have kind of her own stuff going on. But so she says that she witnessed some of these things in Annaliese herself, but then so did the sister with the apple. Dad never, I haven't read sources of where dad says that he saw or heard the same things that mom did, other than the fact that he also hasn't ever disputed any of this. So I don't know. And again, her, the testing, her brain came back very absolutely normal. And that's also the thing that, I would imagine a psychologist or psychiatrist would look at something like that and be able to say, oh yeah, this is whatever, this part of the brain was affected, or that if you're getting back,
or that medical examiner,
yeah,
it was during the autopsy. So
yeah, I'm old enough too to know that I don't know everything. I think that's the problem that we kind of face sometimes is
we do.
People think they know everything and are very hard line about it.
I mean, I will tell you this, and I mean, take it for what you will. I'm not going to get into the story tonight, but you know the story. But and I always say the story as though it is this big thing. It's actually something that shook me to my core many years ago, and I'm not sure that it won't ever leave because it held that much gravity or weight. But it was working when I was working once in an ICU, and a series of events happened leading up to a man's death, and everyone in that room was a bit different in the sense of the man had grown children who were Christians and concerned for their father's faith. And this is not going to be a show. This isn't even getting into like whether or not you need to believe in certain things. It's just, we've been talking about UFOs lately with the government. So it's about the unexplained. It's about the things that people can't really understand fully. And some things happened, and this man eventually dies. But in the few minutes before he died, like I said, his grown children were there that were Christians with Bibles open praying. I'm in the room. I've got a couple of physicians in the room, a couple of other nurses in the room. Some people are agnostic. Some people are atheists. Some people are Christians. You've got all different types of people in there. We all saw the same thing, and we all left with the same feeling. So there's that. It wasn't like any of our backgrounds precluded us to have any kind of, there was no prejudice there with that. So we all left feeling the same way. We all felt very interested to talk to the chaplain after the fact. Yeah. And the chaplain made the point, and it was never a practice of mine to speak with the chaplain after a death. You just kind of keep working. So you just keep working. Yeah. And if the family wants to speak with the chaplain, they do, and not myself as the nurse. And so I did. And I said, essentially it was, please tell me what I just saw. Like, please explain this to me. Like, and I've got some background in the church and this and that I've never in my life. And his point, and this would be to the point here with Annaliese, if this is something that you believe to be true, is that things like this, or things like what was witnessed in that room that night, used to happen and still happen in other countries a little bit more than what we might see now in modern day America, because we also have modern day medicine. So we have sedatives, and we have, as someone nears the end of life, we make them comfortable and peaceful, right? We have hospice. We have these things that are wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I'm thankful we do, but that may mask sometimes some things. And I don't mean necessarily demonic possession, but just anything that could happen at the time of one's death.
Yeah.
So I just think that's an interesting tidbit to keep in mind. I don't know this one though. And you can go back. I think that there's, like I said, I think 40 something of the exorcisms out of the 67 were recorded. So you can find a lot of them and you can listen to them and know that it's disturbing to listen to at its core. And I think that's when I told you, I read one of the comments on, I watched a blip about this the other day, and one of the comments that someone had written was just essentially saying, how terrifying this is on two accounts, because one, if it's, I don't want to say just mental illness, but if it's mental illness with a lack of any demonic possession, nothing like that, just a really strong, and he had said, well, then that's terrifying, that it can get this kind of bad. Mm-hmm. And then he was like, and then, of course, if it is demonic, then that's a whole different kind of level of terrifying. But, I don't know. What do you guys think? Did you guys in the chats?
I think this is, I think this is one of those things that probably doesn't come up in a lot of conversations. Maybe like if a horror movie comes out, but like legitimately study a case or to start to look at something. Mm-hmm. As is, and not lump everything into one category and think they're all the same, because they're definitely not. And I think anytime you start to get those kind of injuries and just growling to everything.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just joining us, we're talking about Annaliese Michel. Again, here's another picture during one of the exorcisms. Here's another one there on the right. If you're listening, I'm just showing some of the photos that we looked at earlier. Eventually, shield your eyes. That's what she looked like by the time of her death. And finally, here's a picture of her. So again, she was 66 pounds when she died.
Which that in itself, And you and I have talked about the lightest body that I've ever been around was like 23 pounds. And she was basically petrified. She'd been dead for 6-7 years. It was basically just sealed off in her bedroom in her house.
Oh, yeah.
But the body itself, even fully petrified like that, was 23 pounds. So I can't imagine what a grown woman at 67 pounds.
Mm-hmm. Yep, she was 30 kilograms.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Marine's Blood is saying she looks in serious pain. If you missed some of the show, one would argue she either self-inflicted these injuries over the course of almost a year, or the possession that overtook her was throwing her around. Again, like I said, she had gone down to pray so much and just hundreds of times a day in between getting thrown around the room that she ultimately tore all the ligaments in both of her knees and her kneecaps were both broken by the time she died. Anyway, so
yeah,
happy Tuesday. But ultimately, this does come down to, were the priests and the parents negligent? Is this something, did they commit negligent homicide? Should they have been convicted of that? And, which they were, like I said, they were, but then with no sentence, because it was they've suffered enough kind of thing. And they weren't like a,
Yeah.
Greg, are you asking, when you say what was it? Wait, are you talking about my story, or are you talking about?
He may have been, when that comment came in, he may have been talking about, well, what was it like? What did she have? Maybe.
Yeah, she had 6 demons inside her.
Yeah.
Potentially. Yeah. That's all I got.
What are you drinking out of over there?
A mug.
Yeah.
A mug. Yeah, we've partnered up with a little company, kind of a company. It's a little bit smaller, and it's in the same region of the United States as us, and it's called Illicit Apparel Daily Threads. And so you'll see, he's got on one of the shirts right there. And so you'll see us post stories and pictures and stuff. I think a whole new little Christmas line just came out. I saw the other day.
Yeah.
Every time I hop on there, I feel like there's something new.
I try to what do you call it? Repost or cut and paste. Screenshot.
Well, I've gotten a couple of whoa, hey.
Oh, my camera was unplugged.
Your camera was
Cool.
unplugged. Brittany Faulkner saying the shirts are amazing. I've been loving them. So I'll get on and look around, and then maybe a few days later, and it's like there's always something new, it seems like, popping up. So this mug, if you can't see it, I love it. I had to order it the second I saw it. It says, might be blurry on the camera, but it just says, "Good golly, Miss Dolly." And it's got Dolly Parton. We also have some of our stuff. So they're carrying our stuff too. So that is a Disruptors mug. They look a little blurry. Can you tell I'm not an influencer? I don't know how to whatever they all do, which is a super cool one. And then, a lot of these cool designs you can find on clothing as well. So like this night shift, and it says really small at the bottom, night shift with Andre Ablade at the bottom. Those are on shirts. That Disruptors one's on a shirt. I think they have this one on a shirt, don't they? The Miss Dolly?
A bunch.
Okay.
Like a bunch of different, like different colors.
Oh, I think that's right. I think I did see it, like tanks and stuff and t-shirts. But anyway, so check out Illicit Apparel Daily Threads for sure. And since you are no longer letting your pretty face be seen.
That was good timing, at least.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's kind of nice, guys, not to do a show that's 2.5 hours long.
Yeah.
Oof. My goodness. Oh, Greg's catching up. He said he just saw that last photo. Yeah, it's tough.
And that's what I mean. There's usually an explanation for most things. Like you said, like when you're around somebody with a schizophrenic break, or someone could have some kind of medical disorder that causes something to happen, bruising to look worse than it is, or what But I think sometimes when you can't explain it, and when an ME does the autopsy and things don't come back the way they normally are, maybe we don't know everything in life. That's all I'm saying.
You're exactly right. Do y'all have any questions in the chats before we head out?
Illicit apparel.
Daily Threads.
Daily Threads.
Check them out.
.com.
Check them out. .com.
Yeah.
I feel like we've obviously ordered a ton of stuff from there because I feel like we should since
Yeah.
we're partnered with them. But the shipping's pretty quick too.
Yes. So I got the sweatshirt, the Disruptors Comfort Color.
Oh yeah, that's a cool one.
Yeah. So that one I think was several days, not many. Which is, I mean, good. That's some places you order something, you're waiting a month or two or whatever.
Yeah.
But,
not bad at all.
Yeah.
So go check them out, guys. We will let y'all get to it. It's Thanksgiving week, y'all. Happy Thanksgiving. That's another reason we kind of did a show tonight that didn't require too much leg work on the front end. I will tell you, speaking of leg work, elsewhere though, peripherally, we've kind of got a lot of irons in the fire. I feel like with other cases. Some we've talked about before, some we haven't talked about with you guys. Reaching out to a lot of people, trying to get a lot of information on some things because we think we may be on to something. We'll have to let that simmer.
Yes. Yeah.
But
yeah. And there's one, we won't say what the case is. One we've been talking back and forth about quite a bit where we'll do some more leg work and see, because we don't believe somebody was guilty.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then there's another one that we think someone who's already in prison potentially could use another charge.
That's the other thing. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but people for some reason believe if somebody's law enforcement, prior law enforcement, that they just automatically assume that 100% of the time everything is correct when someone's charged.
Oh, yeah.
And sadly, it's not. I mean, we study cases like that. Every agency does. Good detectives do. You study cases where somebody was wrongfully charged and convicted oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we've talked about with interviews that people do false confessions.
Yeah.
And why do they do the false confessions? And how can a case go wrong? And it's usually not anything to do with police corruption or any kind of police cover-up. It is honing in on one person and misreading sometimes information or evidence or lack of evidence and then assuming that's correct. But I don't know, the more you and I look at cases and talk and reach out to people and reach out to agencies, the one that we're kind of doing in the background right now is I don't know. It's got my interest up a lot.
The one who we think is wrongfully convicted?
No, I'm sorry. The one that
who needs to be convicted for more.
Yeah,
I think we're connecting dots. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's enough code talk for y'all. I'm sorry. That might have gotten boring, but but it's keeping me buzzing. You can as all of a sudden I may be at work or something, and I'm like, oh, what about this? What about that? But okay. Well, you are now fully invisible to everyone. So
I tried multiple cameras.
Okay.
Nothing will pull up for whatever reason.
Well, you guys, I hope you have the best Thanksgiving ever. And if you're traveling, be really safe. This is the most traveled holiday of the year. I think it still is. It always has been historically. So be careful if you are. And if not, enjoy the time. Get some rest if you can. Put your feet up if you can. We've got to prep for some company coming in town and whatnot. So we'll be doing all that. But it was great to see y'all. Listen, come back to Night Shift every Tuesday night on YouTube on the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel. Listen wherever you stream podcasts. So iTunes, Spotify, you name it. Like, rate, review, subscribe. It's free, y'all. That's what I always say at the end of the little blurps when I post stuff. But it's true. So all of that doesn't cost a dime. And we love doing it. But help us out and go get something over at Illicit Apparel Daily Threads. So
Perfect.
Right?
Yep.
Right. So it was great to see you guys. You can follow Brian at Brian Sanders Disruptors on Instagram. And from there, you can find all his other. Then just put those. What's it called? Is it an anagram when things are like
Yeah, right.
switched
Where you move
around?
it around. Yeah.
Yeah. So take that and then just start switching around in different, and you'll find his website and his YouTube channel and his other Instagram.
Yep.
Yep.
That's it. Mhm.
That's how you do it. All right. You want to tell the folks good night?
Good night, everybody.
All right. Well, until next time, we will see y'all next Tuesday. Night, y'all.